Lord Acton said it well when he remarked that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In contrast, when the founding fathers of the country drafted the Declaration of Independence, they established a profound principle, that the government authority rests on the consent of the governed. As it turns out, there is a nuance in this week's Parsha that alludes to this great principle. The Torah describes the sin offering brought in the case of an inadvertent wrongdoing. It lists 4 different types of offenders: the high priest, the Sanhedrin, the individual, and the ruler. For the first 3, the law is introduced with the word im, if. But in the case of the ruler, the law is introduced with the word asher, when. The Torah seems to be suggesting that in the case of the 3, sin is possible, but not necessarily a foregone conclusion. In the case of the ruler, however, the Torah sees them as prone to err. Why does the Torah make this distinction? Rav Meir Simcha of Dvinsk, the Meshech Chochmah, points out that in any form of Judaic government there are 2 constraints. First is the overarching sovereignty of the Torah. That is why the Torah commands a Jewish king to carry a Sefer Torah with him at all times. The second is the accountability of the people. Unlike the high priest or the high court, who are not answerable to the people, in Jewish tradition a ruler must always rely on popular support, without which he can be deposed. Yet doing what the people want is not always what God wants. King Saul made this mistake in connection with not destroying King Agag, as God had directed. Saul's desire to appease the public was in violation of God's commandment, and it cost him the throne. King David made a similar mistake in connection with ordering the census against God's command. Thus, a political leader is much more likely to violate God's will than a priest or judge, because the priest and judge are appointed for life and cannot be deposed. The Torah, however, goes one step further and adds an even greater burden on the ruler. Says the Talmud, as long as a person is focused on personal spiritual improvement, he is not held accountable for the wrongdoings of the community. However, once a person holds public office, the whole burden of the community affairs rests on him. The Torah understands that given this dual layer of responsibility, both to God and over the people whom they rule, it is likely that political leaders will err. Therefore, by using the word asher concerning the sin offering of the Jewish ruler, the Torah is signaling its unique approach to leadership, which is a combination of idealism and pragmatism. Idealism comes from adhering to the Torah, and pragmatism comes from the understanding that what matters most is not that a leader never gets it wrong, but that he introspect and be honest enough to admit his mistakes to himself, to the people, and to God.